Man mocked his disabled date, then found out she was the CEO hiring him. He mocked his disabled date without a second thought, only to learn, moments later, that she was the CEO about to decide his fate. It was 7:03 p.m., sharp, when Ethan pushed open the glass door of Le Verre, one of the most exclusive bistros in the city. His blazer was tailored, shoes polished, cufflinks real silver. His watch cost more than most people's rent. He scanned the room quickly, eyes alert. The hostess gave him a slight nod of recognition and gestured toward the table reserved under his name. But he saw her before she could say it. His date, already seated, halfway through her glass of mineral water. She was striking in a way that wasn't obvious. Clean lines, simple navy dress, posture like she owned the air around her. But what caught him off guard wasn't her face. It was the wheelchair. His stride faltered. Just a half step, barely noticeable, but it was enough. "Claire?" he asked, voice steady but the edge unmistakable. She looked up and smiled. "Ethan. Right on time." He forced a polite grin and slid into his seat, avoiding any glance downward. "So, this is unexpected," he said, reaching for the menu, though he already knew what he'd order. "You didn't mention this on your profile." Claire didn't flinch. "Does anyone list everything?" The waiter approached before he could respond. Claire ordered confidently. Ethan picked something simple, suddenly too aware of how this evening was shaping up. He'd expected a power player, someone bold, magnetic, someone who matched his ambition. This question mark. This felt like a letdown. As the meal began, so did the performance. "So tell me, Claire," he said, swirling his wine, "what do you do when you're not conquering wine lists?" She tilted her head. "I work in strategy consulting." He smirked, sipping too quickly. "Ah, the kind of work where you advise companies without really getting your hands dirty." "Smart." She held his gaze. "Sometimes not getting your hands dirty is the smartest move." He let out a sharp breath through his nose, his version of a laugh. "Look," he said, setting his glass down, "you seem nice, and I respect your resilience." He said the word as if it were a medal pinned to a jacket. "But I'm looking for someone who's fully available, not dealing with complications." Claire's expression didn't change. "You mean someone who doesn't make you uncomfortable?" "Don't put words in my mouth," he said, half raising his hands. She folded her napkin neatly beside her plate. "You've already said enough." There was a pause. Ethan checked his watch. "Look, I won't waste your time." He reached for the check, but Claire raised a finger. "No need. It's been taken care of." That threw him off. "By who?" She smiled softly. "Let's just say, I have a corporate card." He pushed back from the table, half standing. "Well, I hope you find what you're looking for." Claire didn't blink. "Oh, I will." He turned to go, but paused when she said, "Ethan?" He looked back. A hint of irritation crossed his face. "Yes? I'll see you again tomorrow morning. Don't be late." He frowned. "Excuse me?" But she was already rolling away from the table, leaving only her half-empty glass and a man struggling to make sense of what he just heard. Have you ever judged someone too quickly and later regretted it? Let me know in the comments, because this story might change the way you see people. Ethan Blackstone lived in a condo that looked like a magazine cover. Concrete walls, leather furniture, an espresso machine he never used but liked to show off. At 38, he'd built a version of himself that appeared bulletproof. Clean-shaven jawline, fitted suits, a curated list of words he used in meetings like leverage, synergy, and pipeline. He wasn't always like this. Ethan grew up on the outskirts of Chicago in a 2-bedroom rental with a single mom who worked night shifts at a hospital. He used to study by flashlight under the covers while his little sister, Rachel, slept beside him. He told himself back then, "One day, I won't need coupons." One day, people will call me sir. By his late 20s, he'd climbed the ladder fast enough that he started skipping rungs. He joined a consulting firm, worked 70-hour weeks, and wore his burnout like a badge of honor. Promotions came, followed by business-class flights, corner offices, and just enough praise to keep him hooked. But then came the merger. New management, restructuring, redundancies. Ethan was let go with a cold handshake and 3 months severance. He didn't see it coming. He didn't plan for it. And worse, he didn't tell anyone right away. For 3 weeks, he still wore his suits and left the apartment each morning as if nothing had happened. He sat in coffee shops pretending to be on work calls, silently refreshing his inbox. His savings were draining, and his ego was fraying. That's when Rachel, his younger sister, married, stable, far less obsessed with status, gave him the gift. A 6-month premium membership to ExecMeet, an exclusive matchmaking app for professionals. Meet someone real, she said. Someone who doesn't care about resumes. He rolled his eyes at first, but the silence in his condo grew too loud, so he uploaded a few photos, wrote a half-sincere bio, and began swiping through profiles like a bored executive scrolling emails. Claire's profile was minimalist. No job title, no glamorous photos. Just one candid shot in a bookstore cafe and a line that read, "A mind worth meeting beats a wallet worth flaunting." He liked the quote. He thought it made him seem open-minded to swipe right. He had no idea what was coming. Claire Hastings was the kind of person who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. When she entered a room, people noticed, even before they knew her title. Sharp features, thoughtful eyes, and a presence that didn't shout, it commanded. At 42, Claire had been CEO of Lockridge Strategies for nearly 5 years. Her firm handled high-level turnarounds, market entries, and corporate restructuring for billion-dollar clients. She didn't just sit at the table, she owned the table, chaired the board, and redesigned the floor plan. But her journey wasn't smooth. Not even close. At 25, Claire was a rising consultant with a job offer in hand and a future that looked bulletproof. One rainy evening, she was driving home from a client dinner when a distracted driver ran a red light. The collision shattered more than just metal. It crushed 2 vertebrae, severed her spinal cord, and changed the trajectory of her life forever. There were months she couldn't even hold a pen. Her physical recovery was only the beginning. What really tested her was the slow burn of doubt, the pity from colleagues, the way meetings continued without her, the promotions that almost happened but didn't. So she rewrote the rules. She returned to grad school, finished top of her class, and got certified in executive leadership. Every no she received became fuel. Every raised eyebrow became incentive. Within a decade, she wasn't just back in the room, she was leading the firm. Claire learned to spot authenticity early. She could sniff out arrogance under a silk tie and insecurity hiding behind loud jokes. That's why dating had become exhausting. Men saw her chair before her intellect, or worse, they saw her success and treated it like a threat. That's why she made the profile, private, anonymous, no titles. She didn't want someone who admired her power. She wanted someone who could see her as a whole person, layered, complex, vulnerable, powerful, equal. Then she saw Ethan's profile. His photos were polished, his job title carefully worded. His opening line read, "I build companies and make people millions. Ask me how over dinner." Claire almost swiped left, but something in his face, maybe the weariness behind the smile, made her pause. She swiped right. They messaged, brief, clean, polite. He suggested dinner. She agreed. But the moment he walked into Lever, she recognized the name. Ethan Blackston. He was one of the final candidates for a newly opened partner track position at her firm, Lockridge Strategies. His application had passed the first round. The second interview was scheduled for the next morning, with her. He had no idea. As she watched him shift in his chair, trying to conceal his judgment behind smug charm, she realized this was more than a date. This was a window, a test. Neither of them knew that the most important meeting of their lives had already begun, long before the formalities of offices and resumes. Ethan thought he was dining with a woman who didn't match his expectations. He didn't know she held his future in her hands. Claire wasn't seeking revenge. She didn't believe in setting traps. But she did believe in seeing people as they really are, and she had just seen more of Ethan than any resume could ever reveal. The next morning, when Ethan walked into the marble lobby of Lockridge Strategies, portfolio in hand, he was nervous but polished. He had no idea who would be waiting in the interview room, but she did, and she hadn't forgotten a single word he said the night before. Ethan adjusted his tie in the mirrored elevator panel as it glided silently to the 34th floor. He'd rehearsed his pitch a dozen times in his head. Highlight strengths, downplay the layoff, smile, lean in, speak with confidence. They already liked my resume. Just don't screw it up in the room. The doors opened to a vast minimalist reception area, frosted glass walls, strategic lighting. Everything screamed precision and money. Mr. Blackstone, the assistant stood with a tablet in hand. The CEO will see you now. The CEO? Ethan blinked. I thought I was meeting with the hiring panel. There's been a change, she offered a polite smile. This is the final step. His palms started to sweat. The door opened silently. The office was large, elegant, and immaculate. A city skyline poured in from the tall windows behind the desk. Everything felt still, perfectly composed. And then, movement. The chair turned slowly. Claire. Ethan stopped cold. His mouth opened. No words came out. Claire sat composed, hands folded over a legal pad, gaze steady and unreadable. She wore a fitted black blazer, no jewelry, no visible expression. The only sound was the faint ticking of a wall clock behind him. Good morning, Mr. Blackstone, she said evenly. Please, have a seat. He obeyed like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. Silence stretched between them. I assume you remember me, she said, finally breaking it. He cleared his throat. Yes, last night. Levere. Indeed, she said. No smile. There was no warmth in her voice, but there wasn't cruelty either. Just control. Absolute control. I must admit, she continued, when your name came up on the final candidate list, I didn't expect to have met you already. He tried to chuckle. It came out as a cough. Small world, right? Her eyes didn't move. Is that how you'd describe it? He shifted in his chair. Claire opened the folder in front of her. Your resume is impressive on the surface, but I find that credentials alone rarely reveal who someone truly is. He nodded. Of course, I believe culture fit is just as important. I'm glad to hear that, she said. Let's explore that fit, shall we? She glanced down at a page. Tell me, Mr. Blackstone, how do you define leadership? He latched onto the question, grateful for the lifeline. Leadership is about vision, clarity, and decisiveness. It's about taking responsibility and setting the standard for others to follow. Claire tilted her head slightly. And empathy? Where does that fall in your definition? Ethan hesitated. Well, yes, of course. Empathy, too. It's essential, especially in client-facing roles. Interesting, she said. Would you say your empathy is consistent regardless of someone's appearance or ability? He looked up sharply. Her tone was still calm. I try to be open-minded, he said. I believe in treating people equally. Claire nodded slowly. I wonder if equality and equity feel the same to the people on the receiving end. He was sweating now. She flipped the page. Let's discuss problem solving. Say you were in a high-stakes pitch meeting and someone made a biased remark about a colleague. How would you respond? Ethan swallowed. Well, I'd redirect the conversation, make sure to support my colleague afterward, and address it directly if needed. Her gaze lingered. Would you do that even if no one else seemed to notice? Yes, definitely, he said too quickly. Claire smiled, faintly, just for a second. So you're saying your principles don't depend on audience approval? Exactly, he said, trying to regain footing. I believe character is shown most when no one's watching. Or when someone is, she replied. The silence that followed was thick with meaning. She leaned back, scanning his expression. You made an impression last night, she said finally. His chest tightened. Your reaction. The things you didn't say. The timing of your glance at your watch. You were punctual, but only for your own expectations. He shifted again. Honestly, I didn't expect. Someone in a wheelchair? She finished for him. His eyes dropped to the desk. Claire let the pause settle before continuing. You were courteous, but not kind, polite, but performative. You assumed you had nothing to gain, so you gave nothing of value. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. But here you are, she said, pen in hand, applying for a leadership role at a firm whose values include empathy, depth, and discernment, the very qualities you withheld. He looked at her now, properly. Not the wheelchair, not the title, just her. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't know. She raised an eyebrow. Would you have behaved differently if you did? He flinched. Claire glanced down and scribbled something. Then she looked up and said, I haven't made a final decision. Ethan blinked. I believe in redemption, but I also believe in evidence. So here's what we'll do. She slid a folder across the table. Inside is a challenge scenario. You'll have 24 hours to respond. Think of it as your opportunity to prove who you are when stakes are real and assumptions are off the table. He took the folder cautiously. Claire didn't rise. She didn't need to. Thank you for your time, she said. You'll hear from me soon. Ethan stood slowly, folder in hand. At the door, he paused. Claire, she looked up. I meant what I said earlier, about character. She studied him for a moment. I hope you did, she said. And with that, he walked out. What would you do if you realized someone you underestimated held your future in their hands? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one. The door to Claire's office closed behind him, but the weight of it lingered in Ethan's chest like a bruise that hadn't fully bloomed. He stepped into the elevator in a daze, gripping the challenge folder like it was a sentence, not a second chance. He didn't even remember walking out of the building. He got in his car and just sat there, keys unmoved in the ignition, watching his reflection in the windshield. His own face looked older, smaller, reduced. What the hell had he done? A sick churn of embarrassment, anger, and confusion rolled through him, and for once the anger wasn't directed at anyone else. It was him. It had always been him. He leaned back in the seat, one hand on his forehead. His mind spiraled, unspooling the events of the last 24 hours on a cruel loop. He remembered the dinner, the polite smile Claire had worn, the invisible line he'd drawn the moment he saw her wheelchair. How quickly he'd shut down, emotionally clocking out while still holding the fork. He'd written her off as a non-contender, a dinner he had to get through. His loss in every possible sense. And now? Now she stood between him and the future he wanted so desperately. But more than that, she had seen him clearly. Not the version he curated, but the man beneath the shell. He had underestimated her, dismissed her, and she hadn't even needed to retaliate. She just let the truth reveal itself. And that was what burned the most. I don't think you were cruel. I think you were empty. He imagined her saying it, though she hadn't. She hadn't needed to. The mirror had spoken loud enough. He was 10 again, standing in his childhood bathroom, trying not to cry after a scraped knee. His father's voice echoed from behind. Come on, Ethan. You want to be a man or a mess? No one respects weakness. Suck it up. Suck it up. It was the phrase that built him. Brick by brick. No tears, no softness. Smile when you win. Shrug when you lose. Never admit fear. Never show need. Appear strong. So he learned how to armor himself. First with sarcasm, then status, then women, degrees, watches, accolades. He built a life so layered in presentation he almost believed it. Almost. Until a woman in a wheelchair pulled it all apart without raising her voice. That night, Ethan poured himself a drink and sat in the dark. He didn't touch the folder on the table. Not yet. Instead, he reached for something rarer. Honesty. He pulled out a notebook he usually used for work notes. This time, he opened it to a blank page and started writing. He listed the people he remembered brushing past. The intern whose idea he claimed in a meeting 3 years ago. The ex-girlfriend he broke up with over text because she got too emotional. The waiter he mocked in front of friends because he stuttered. The homeless man he once lied to about having no cash, despite the 20 in his wallet. Each memory landed like a quiet blow. He'd never been abusive, never cruel, but he'd been hollow, calculated, self-contained to the point of insulation. He always told himself it was ambition, but maybe it was fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being judged, fear of failing without a mask. He closed the notebook and sat back. This wasn't about Claire. Not really. It was about the parts of himself he'd buried long ago. Any hint of softness, of empathy, of human need, and how, without those parts, he'd become successful, but not whole. Across the city, Claire sat in her office with 2 senior partners. Let's talk about Blackstone, said Aaron, the COO. He's got experience, high-level consulting work, good numbers, solid references. He's confident, added Lila, the head of strategy. Some edge, but that's not uncommon at that level. Claire tapped her pen on the armrest of her wheelchair, thoughtful. He has the right resume, she said, but I'm not sure he has the right internal compass. They both looked at her. I'm not questioning his intelligence, she continued, but leadership here isn't just about ideas or results. It's about the atmosphere you create when no one's watching, the energy you bring into a room, the space you make for others. Lila raised an eyebrow. Did he do something specific? Claire shook her head gently. Let's just say I've seen him in an unfiltered context. I'm not sure empathy is a muscle he's used often. Is that a deal breaker? Aaron asked. It's a growth opportunity, Claire replied, but only if he sees it. She didn't mention the dinner. She didn't need to. It wasn't about punishing Ethan. It was about ensuring that the next leader of this firm could hold both power and humility. She turned her chair slightly, gazing out the window. Give him the space to rise, she said finally, but don't lower the bar. Ethan finally opened the folder. Inside was a scenario, a crisis involving a junior staffer, a budget error, and a discriminatory comment made during a meeting. He'd have to write a full response. What he would do as the leader, how he'd resolve the situation, and how he'd ensure it never happened again. But before he could touch the pen, he paused. He realized he couldn't fake this, couldn't spin it. If he wanted any hope of earning Claire's trust, or rebuilding any semblance of integrity, it had to come from a different place entirely. For once, he wouldn't write what he thought they wanted to hear. He would write what he needed to believe. Have you ever had to confront a version of yourself you didn't like? What did it teach you? Share your story in the comments. We grow by reflecting. Together. The hum of Ethan's phone broke the silence of his apartment as the morning sunlight poured through the blinds. He had barely slept, his mind racing through a dozen potential outcomes from his meeting with Claire. Was this his last chance at a job? A new beginning? Or had he just been exposed as the imposter he feared he might be? He reached for his phone. Email. Welcome to the team. But first, a condition. His pulse quickened. His finger hovered over the screen, but for a moment he couldn't bring himself to open it. His mind replayed everything, the dinner, the interview, the reflections of his own failures. He opened the email. Subject, welcome to the team. But first, a condition. Dear Ethan, after careful consideration, I'm pleased to extend an offer to join our team at Blackstone Consulting. You bring valuable experience, and I believe you have potential to be a key part of our leadership. However, I'm not offering you a permanent position just yet. I'm offering you a probationary period, during which you'll work closely under my direct leadership. This will give us both time to assess if you truly embody the qualities we seek at Blackstone. Your ability to lead with empathy, integrity, and collaboration will be tested from day one. I expect nothing less than your best effort. Best regards, Claire Matthews, CEO, Blackstone Consulting. Ethan sat back, staring at the screen. He had been given a chance, but not one that came with easy promises. It was clear. She was testing him, but she also believed he could grow. Could he prove her right? He inhaled deeply, his heart pounding. Then, with a shaky hand, he hit reply. He arrived at Blackstone Consulting's sleek glass and steel headquarters the next morning, his mind buzzing with anticipation. The email had been a lifeline, yes, but it had also put him under a magnifying glass, exposed for all his flaws and his potential. There was no turning back now. As he approached the elevator, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished surface of the building's entrance. He looked different somehow, more aware, more vulnerable. No more masks. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and he stepped inside, heart still racing. He hadn't been this nervous in a long time, but it was a good kind of nervous, the kind that suggested change was possible. Ethan walked into the same executive office where he had met Claire just the day before. Today, it felt different. His steps were measured, his posture straight, though his stomach still twisted with tension. Claire was already seated at her desk, her eyes on a stack of documents in front of her. When she heard him approach, she looked up and nodded. There was no smile, no friendly gestures, just an air of professionalism and authority. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Take a seat." He sat, his hands clenched in his lap, as he tried to remain calm. The room was quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that filled every corner with expectation. "You've seen the email," Claire began, breaking the silence. "I'm offering you the job, but it's not a sure thing. We both know you have the skills. What you don't have is the character to lead, at least not yet." Ethan swallowed hard. He had expected this. He had expected her to lay it out clearly, no pretense. But hearing it from her, seeing her unwavering confidence, made it sting more than he'd anticipated. "You have potential," she continued, "but the moment you look down on someone, dismiss them because of their appearance, their experience, their role, you're no longer fit to lead." The words hit him like a blow to the chest. His mouth went dry, and he fought the urge to squirm. She was right. He had looked down on Claire. He had done it in the restaurant the night before, and he had done it to countless others in his life. He had never realized just how destructive that behavior was until now. But Claire didn't seem angry. She wasn't even disappointed. She was simply stating facts. Facts that, at that moment, felt like they were being carved into his soul. "I need to know," Claire said, her gaze steady, "that you'll never forget the people around you. Your success doesn't matter unless you bring others with you. If you're willing to learn that, then you have a chance. A real chance. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. I understand. She looked at him for a moment, as if weighing his sincerity. Then, with a slow nod, she stood and extended her hand. Then, welcome to the team, she said. Ethan stood, taking her hand firmly in his. There was no bravado, no fake confidence, just a moment of pure humility and gratitude. The next few weeks passed in a blur for Ethan. He threw himself into his work with a determination he hadn't known he had. Every task was an opportunity to prove himself, not just as a professional, but as a person. He was learning to listen, to engage with his team, to show up for them the way he'd never done before. It wasn't easy. He still caught himself thinking in old patterns, evaluating people based on status, appearance, or influence. But every time he did, he remembered Claire's words. The moment you look down on someone, you're no longer fit to lead. Each time he made a mistake, each time he faltered, he took a moment to reflect. What would he have done in the past? How could he have done better? And slowly, over time, he began to change. He started to understand that leadership wasn't about dominance. It was about connection, empathy, and mutual respect. The most surprising part, Claire's mentoring wasn't about criticizing or pointing out flaws. It was about holding up a mirror. She didn't need to tell him what to do next. She simply showed him where he needed to go. The rest was up to him. And as he discovered, that was the hardest and most rewarding part of all. Do you think Claire made the right decision offering him the job? Or should she have turned him away? Let's hear your take. Months passed since Ethan's probationary period began, and the transformation was undeniable. He had made it through the grueling early days, where every task seemed to carry the weight of his past mistakes, and now he found himself in a new rhythm, one that was far more connected to the people around him. The old Ethan, the one who chased superficial success and judged others based on shallow metrics, had faded into the background. Instead, the man who stood before his colleagues now was one of purpose, grounded in empathy and collaboration. And it didn't happen overnight. Ethan had become someone his colleagues noticed, though not in the way he had anticipated. The first signs of change had come during an important meeting with his team. It was a high-stakes pitch to a potential client, and Ethan had been given the responsibility of leading the conversation. In the past, he might have relied on his own knowledge and charisma, pushing the conversation in his favor to show off his credentials. But this time was different. He didn't rush to the front of the room with all the answers. Instead, he encouraged his team to speak up, to share their thoughts. And he listened intently, asking follow-up questions that invited deeper discussion. When the meeting ended, Claire had pulled him aside. "You did well today," she said, "but what impressed me most was how you let others speak. You're finally understanding that leadership isn't about taking all the credit. It's about creating space for others to shine." It was a small compliment, but it meant the world to Ethan. He had always thought leadership was about being the loudest voice in the room. Now he was realizing that leadership was about listening, empowering others, and fostering a sense of community. He had changed, and it was showing. Ethan's efforts weren't confined to the boardroom. Claire had suggested that he attend disability inclusion workshops, an initiative that the company was championing. At first, Ethan had been hesitant. He wasn't sure what he would gain from them, especially considering how little he had thought about accessibility and inclusion in the past. But as he sat through the workshops, listening to speakers share their personal stories, his perspective began to shift even further. He began to see the world through a different lens. His previous dismissiveness toward others' challenges, whether physical, emotional, or societal, had been a product of his own fear and insecurity. He realized how much his attitude had been rooted in his need to feel superior, in his desire to be above others. The truth was, everyone had their struggles, and those struggles didn't make anyone less worthy of respect or opportunity. By the end of the first workshop, Ethan had approached Claire with a newfound sense of purpose. "I want to mentor the interns," he said. "I think I can help them, show them what leadership really looks like." Claire raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "I think that's a good idea. But remember, mentoring is more than just telling them what to do. It's about guiding them, teaching them to trust their instincts, and creating space for them to grow in their own way." Ethan nodded. He understood now. It wasn't about showing off his knowledge, it was about building trust, patience, and a genuine connection. Claire's recognition of Ethan's growth didn't go unnoticed. Slowly but surely, she began to hand him more responsibility. First, it was smaller projects that involved coordinating different departments. Then, as his confidence grew, she began trusting him with more complex initiatives, client negotiations, leadership development programs, even internal policy revisions. But every time she gave him more responsibility, she also challenged him to dig deeper. She would ask questions that forced him to reflect on his decisions, pushing him not just to succeed, but to understand why he was making the choices he was. One afternoon, as they sat across from each other in her office, reviewing a new strategy, Claire leaned back in her chair and looked at him thoughtfully. "You've come a long way," she said. "But I want you to remember one thing. Leadership doesn't come from your position in the company. It comes from how you treat the people around you. How are you showing up for your team today? And more importantly, how are you showing up for yourself?" Ethan thought about her words long after their meeting ended. Leadership was no longer about titles or prestige. It was about integrity, humility, and empathy. He had learned that through his interactions with Claire and through the small moments where he had truly listened to others. As the months passed, the professional relationship between Ethan and Claire began to evolve into something deeper, though not in the way that he had initially expected. There was no romance, no sudden shift into something personal and emotional. Instead, their bond grew in quiet, meaningful ways. They shared ideas and debated decisions, pushing each other to become better versions of themselves. Claire began to respect him in a way she hadn't before. She saw the effort he was making, the ways he had begun to prioritize his team's needs over his own ambitions. She saw his commitment to fostering inclusivity within the workplace and his passion for creating an environment where everyone, regardless of background or ability, could thrive. Ethan, for his part, had come to admire Claire in ways that went beyond her position as CEO. Her strength, her clarity of vision, and her unwavering integrity had been the driving forces behind his own transformation. He no longer viewed her as someone to be judged or evaluated based on superficial criteria. Instead, he saw her as a mentor, someone who had guided him to become not just a better employee, but a better person. Their conversations, once formal and guarded, became more open. They began to discuss not just work, but values, philosophy, and life. Claire, once the unapproachable CEO, now felt like a genuine colleague, a mentor who believed in him. And in turn, Ethan began to challenge her too, offering fresh perspectives and ideas that were rooted in his newfound understanding of leadership and human connection. As Ethan settled more into his role, his transformation was felt not only by Claire, but by the company as a whole. He had once been quick to dismiss the importance of accessibility and respect for diverse needs in leadership. Now he was one of the company's most vocal advocates for change. Ethan spearheaded initiatives to make Blackstone Consulting more inclusive, advocating for policies that would ensure all employees, regardless of ability, had equal access to opportunities. He worked closely with HR to revamp hiring processes, making sure that disability was never a barrier to employment. He collaborated with colleagues to implement mentorship programs aimed at supporting those who had been historically marginalized in the corporate world. His advocacy didn't stop at work. Ethan began to speak publicly about the importance of empathy in leadership. He shared his story with others, admitting how he had once been blind to the experiences of people who were different from him. He shared his journey with the world, hoping to inspire other leaders to make similar changes in their own organizations. In the end, Ethan had become the leader he never thought he could be. His journey had been long, and at times it had been difficult. But he had emerged from it not only as a better professional, but as a more empathetic, humble person. He still had much to learn, but now he was open to that learning. He was no longer motivated by the pursuit of status, but by the desire to build something greater than himself. As for Claire, she had found a new level of respect for Ethan. She had seen him grow, not because of her influence, but because he had chosen to evolve. And in a world where true change is rare, she knew that Ethan's growth wasn't just about him. It was about the entire company, and the impact they would all have on the world, together. They both had changed, and now they were building something far more meaningful than a company. They were building a community of leaders who would uplift each other, who would value empathy, and who would lead with integrity. And for the first time, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace within himself. He wasn't just working for a paycheck anymore. He was working to make the world a better place, and that, in itself, was the most rewarding success of all. Have you ever witnessed someone's transformation like Ethan's? What do you think it takes to truly change and grow? Let's talk about it in the comments. The story of Ethan and Claire is more than just a tale of career advancement and professional growth. It is a journey of personal evolution, of how humility can soften the hardest of hearts, and how leadership is not a badge of power, but a responsibility to guide, uplift, and transform. Throughout the narrative, Claire's presence was steady, yet her power was quiet. She could have retaliated when Ethan dismissed her during their first encounter, or even when he showed little regard for her leadership style. She could have used her authority to exact judgment, to force him to confront his own shortcomings in an overtly confrontational way. But she didn't. Instead, Claire chose the path of education. She saw beyond Ethan's arrogance and insecurities. She recognized the potential for change in him, even when he couldn't see it for himself. Through patience, subtle guidance, and tough but fair mentorship, Claire helped Ethan understand the deeper aspects of leadership, like empathy, respect, and the importance of genuine connection. In doing so, she exemplified a kind of leadership that many aspire to but few truly embody, one that doesn't seek to punish or to prove a point, but instead nurtures growth, teaches through example, and believes in the transformative power of empathy. Claire's strength wasn't in her ability to tear down, it was in her capacity to build up. Ethan's transformation is the heart of this story. He began as a man who was driven by the superficial, the titles, the flashy dates, the luxury, and he mocked what he didn't understand. His world was built on appearances, on being better than others, on being admired for things that had no lasting value. And then came Claire, who shook that world to its core. At first, he didn't know what to make of her. She was a woman in a wheelchair, a challenger to his perception of strength. Someone who seemed to have no place in his fast-paced, achievement-driven world. Yet, over time, he learned that her strength wasn't in her physical ability, but in her unwavering determination, her intelligence, and her dignity. Through his interactions with her, his mistakes, his humility, and his growth, Ethan began to see the flaws in his own thinking. The man who mocked Claire was gone, replaced by someone more thoughtful, more aware, and more mature. His journey wasn't just from arrogance to awareness, it was from mockery to maturity. He came to understand that leadership wasn't about being above others, but about bringing others up. And in the process, Ethan found a deeper, more meaningful kind of success. one that would last far longer than any fleeting title or position ever could. What Ethan's story teaches us is clear. We never truly know who someone is or what they have overcome until we choose to listen, until we choose to respect them, not just based on the superficial or the obvious, but by recognizing the strength that lies beneath the surface. It is easy to dismiss people, to assume that their worth is determined by their appearance, their status, or their outward abilities. But true leaders know better. They know that respect is the foundation of human connection. When we lead with humility, when we approach others with an open heart and a willingness to learn, we unlock a depth of understanding that can change both individuals and entire organizations. And it's not just about what others can teach us, it's about what we can learn from them as well. Ethan's journey from arrogance to awareness, from mockery to maturity, is a testament to the power of second chances. It's a reminder that we are not defined by our past mistakes, but by how we choose to learn from them and grow. It shows that leadership is not a title or position. It is an ongoing process of learning, evolving, and putting others first. In the end, the most profound lesson from Ethan and Claire's story is simple yet transformative. Your worth isn't measured by appearances, titles, or the wealth you accumulate. It's measured by how you treat others, especially those whom society teaches you to overlook. True leadership and humanity are found in the way we respect, empower, and elevate those around us. When we lead with humility, we recognize that every person has a unique story, a value that is not defined by their circumstances, and a voice that deserves to be heard. The ability to see beyond the surface, to embrace differences, and to lead with compassion is what ultimately shapes the leaders of tomorrow. What did this story teach you about respect, humility, and second chances? If it moved you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs this reminder today.